am so privileged, really. I'm taken aback, to be honest with you, because I'm delighted to be here. It's such a blessing for me to have this kind of an evening with your kind of people. And I want to thank President McGrath for his welcome. And also, I just want to make a brief comment. I love his language of faith-based education. Faith-based, now this sounds like a biased opinion, faith-based education is a lot richer than an education that has no faith base at all. I mean, the faith, this was the great struggle, the great history of Catholic education, the very beginning of the church. When the church itself wondered, the great mandate that Jesus of Nazareth gave on the hillside in Galilee when he said, go out and evangelize all people. And then he said, and teach them. And there was a great debate in the beginning of the early church. Should the church simply evangelize? Or should it also educate? And they decided to do both. They decided that the basis of this gospel basis, that the values, the universal values that you find in the gospel of Jesus Christ, could be a powerful foundation for an educational system. Because it was that great partnership between reason and revelation, between faith and culture, between gospel values and knowledge, and that the two together was what could be tremendously life-giving for the life of the world. And the church then decided to do both, to catechize and to educate, to teach reading, writing, arithmetic, rhetoric, and that too was a work, in the words of Clement of Alexandria, was a work of salvation, especially to give a faith-based education. And then, of course, that continues in the history of the whole Western world then, until really the time of the Enlightenment. And in many ways, the church, of course, was the sponsor of all the great universities, the great schools, all arose ex corde ecclesia, from the heart of the church, monitored, sponsored by the church, etc. And then when the Enlightenment came, we kind of took God, the person of God, we took God out of the school, and we took faith away from reason, and we took spiritual wisdom away from knowledge. And then you end up with a much more an impoverished system.
I would take your words away from different news.
Because you're not retarded. I was wired now. Is that working?
Yeah.
Yes. No, this is for the video. Sorry.
For the video.
Thank you.
But anyhow, so faith-based education is an extraordinary gift to the life of the world. And it doesn't mean proselytizing or indoctrinating or manipulating people's lives, but to mount a great system of education that is grounded in faith is a terribly worthwhile project. But then you know that already. And thank you, but I loved it when you said that, President McGrath, and thank you. And thank you, Bishop Lee. It's not every day that I'm introduced by a bishop and welcomed by a bishop. And I can show you some of the marks on my back from bishops. But it's great to meet a wonderful bishop. And the president of Boston College is Father Bill Leahy, as we call him, and he swears he's a cousin of Bishop Leahy. So it's lovely to meet you again, and thank you, Gareth, for your great hospitality. It's a marvelous moment. This great school, this Mater Dei Centre for Catholic Education, it is a great venture, and I think it will bring great blessings throughout all the years ahead. It's interesting, Bishop Leahy kept referring to my expertise, and that's what you usually do if you bring somebody a long way from someplace to give a lecture or a presentation. You always say they're experts. Now, there's an old Irish shanachal, I forgot the Gaelic, but it basically said that an expert is somebody who's a long way from home. And you see, that's my problem. That's why I travel so much, to be an expert. But you see, now I'm at home, so I can't really sound like an expert. And I also have a 16-year-old son who's the ultimate test of my expertise, and who's presently a devout, pious Catholic atheist. He's a Catholic atheist, but he swears to God that he's an atheist. And he got a poor grade in religious education recently. And I said to him, Teddy, how the hell could you get 91 in math and 89 in social studies and 63 in religious education? He said, Dad, terrible textbook. Terrible textbook. I wrote his textbook. So, as I said, the expertise here is very relative indeed. So delighted to be with you, and let's go to work. And I try to engage you in the conversation as well. And I really have three parts to the comments I want to, reflections I want to share with you. Something about the present challenges in our Irish context by way of educating for faith. Can we even educate for faith? I think it's easy enough to do religious education. I think you can take a religion and teach it the way you teach math or science or social studies or English or languages. You can do it purely as a content and dole it out in doses and then give people an exam about it, and they get various grades in it, all this kind of stuff. So in a sense, taking religion and teaching it as a discipline of learning, there's no mystery to it at all. But can you teach for faith? Can you teach in a way that would bring people, that would nurture people's faith, whatever their faith might be? I've taught a course at Boston College for 34 years. Then I got a day job. And the title of the course first semester was Catholicism 1. And the title of the course second semester was Catholicism 2. And I had Jewish students, Islamic students, Protestant students from every denomination, Hindu, Buddhist. I don't mean to be pretentious, but it was a rather popular course on campus. And typically you had to wait till your senior year to get registered in it. There was one particular year they were pre-registering for the following September. I'm not boasting now, but 1,400 students tried to sign up for the course. I could only take 110. But I taught it, but I would say to them, now at the end of this course, I want you, to Muhammad, to be a better Muslim, and Abraham or Sarah, I want you to be a better Jew, and Murphy, you might reconsider your Catholic identity. But from your being exposed to this rich tradition of being a person of faith in a Christian tradition, a Catholic tradition, because I was speaking specifically of the Catholic Christian tradition, and I was never more flattered than when a young man came back about 3 years ago. It was his 25th anniversary. I've been teaching there 40 years. I just made my first Holy Communion when I started teaching at Boston College, and maybe it was my confirmation. But anyway, I've been there 40 years. And this young man came back and he said, "Professor, I want to thank you," because he said, "You brought me back to my Muslim faith." And he said, "I love that course in Catholicism, but it reminded me, it kept constantly bringing me back to reclaim the values, the spiritual wisdom that was in Catholicism, triggered and helped me to remember the spiritual values of my own faith." And he became a devout practicing Muslim again. It was the highest compliment I've ever been paid. And to me, that was evangelization. It was bringing a person back to a rich faith, the practice of a rich faith in God. If he chose to become a Christian, I'd have rejoiced in that as well. But that wasn't my point. That wasn't my purpose. So I think there is a way that we can, whatever the tradition out of which you may be speaking and educating, but we can indeed enrich and enliven people's lives and faith. And it's a simplistic statement, but a life lived in faith, we were saying this over dinner, is a lot richer than a life lived without it. To live without faith is a very precarious and difficult and problematic lifestyle. Because by nature, we're made in the image and likeness of God. We're made for faith. We're spiritual beings. So to deny that aspect of ourselves or to set it aside and think, "Oh, I'll be secular," it's very, very impoverishing. At least impoverishing. Now, I suppose there's a rich way you can live out of some kind of secular humanism, but it's so lacking in a sense compared to a life lived in whatever your faith might be. So can we educate for code and faith? Of course, I'm going to be proposing we can. There's 3 bits and pieces of the conversation. I may not get through all of them because I want to engage you in the conversation as well. But just to put some of it in its historical context. I suppose the Ireland of old was an enchanted world, as Weber calls it. We believed in the spiritual. The spiritual was everywhere and anywhere. And now, according to the social sciences at least, we've become disenchanted. We've moved into a secular age. Now, Charles Taylor, clearly you're very familiar with this, I don't want to waste too much time on it, talks about the secularization of contemporary society, postmodern world, in 3 different expressions or instances. One is the separation of church and state, which is probably it is a wise arrangement. The other is a drop-off of religious practice. As Grace Davy says, many have believed without belonging, and some of them no longer believe. The drop-off of religious practice is very serious, I think. In the United States alone, we have 35 million people who in the last census identify themselves as former Catholics. The biggest religion, the largest religion in America is Catholicism. The second largest religion is former Catholics. And you'd have to say to yourself, now, what are we doing that is so effective in driving people away? We're doing something as a church that drives people away. We have to look at that, I think, very honestly and say, this is a mark. And 74%, I only know the American statistics, pardon me, 74% of them say that leave the Catholic Church, say they left because their spiritual needs, their spiritual hungers were not being met. Now that's a tragedy, because there's no richer, there are other great rich spiritual traditions, but in many ways Catholic Christian faith is a great spirituality. It's a religion and dogmas and doctrines, but ultimately it's a great spirituality for life. So that we weren't meeting people's spiritual needs. We're doing something wrong. And I think it's always better to bring people along than to drive them away. And who's entitled to send anybody away from this faith community? I mean, which one of us is living the gospel to its fullness, turning the other cheek, going the extra mile, loving the enemies, doing good to those who hate us? None of us. So we all fall short of it. So who's entitled? So we've driven people away. It's a very serious thing. But Taylor says the most ominous, the most threatening aspect of post-secular or secularized society is that the conditions of belief have shifted, have changed. Now, this is a very subtle thing, and it's changed in a way that marginalizes faith. And we often talk about it as if it's a bad thing, as if the secular society is robbing us of our faith. But sometimes it's very good reasons. It's advances in science, it's advances in medicine that, in a sense, push faith to the edge, or to the edge of the page, kind of push it out, or offer alternatives to faith, like what Taylor calls an exclusive humanism. And he used the word exclusive because it excludes any reference to the transcendent. And so it's very, that marginalizing of faith, it isn't always for bad reasons at all. I told a story this morning, as I've told before, but I'm probably boring some people that have heard it already. Here's my water. Pardon me, here's this, I haven't poured it already. But when I was about 4 or 5 years old.
As Tom's taking calls, security are looking for, does anyone have a silver Nissan 10C5637? 10C, silver Nissan 10C5637. Nobody in this room? Sorry, God bless you.
No problem, Sandra.
Cars won't be clamped.
The lights are on. The lights no cars are going.
Sorry.
No, not at all. No problem at all. But when I was about 4 or 5 years old, I developed pneumonia. We lived on a farm outside of Clonard, about 35 miles west of here, but the Kildare side of the Boyne. And my dad was in Dublin. He was a politician. There was no car. Anyway, if there was, my mother couldn't drive. Then I really lost a little daughter a few years prior to pneumonia. And so on a winter's night 60 years ago in rural Ireland, pneumonia was indeed an emergency. And the way she always told the story, to harness up the pony and trap it and get into Eton Derry to the doctor would have probably killed me on a winter's night. So what did she do? Well, she knelt down beside my bed, and as she told the story, she told God that she wasn't going to leave there until my fever broke. So I fell asleep, my mother fell asleep, I woke up, she woke up, my fever had broken. And she always told the story that it was a miracle. I've never decided. Point I want to make is a very simple story, very simple instance. And your mothers and grandmothers did the very same type of thing. But the point I want to make is that her grandchildren, now some of them are people of marvelous faith and wonderful human beings, but they never have the tendency to do what their grandmother did. Because what they do instead is they pop the kid in the SUV, and they'd be in the village in 10 minutes, and the child would get a course of penicillin, and we're running around in a couple of days. In other words, we don't need God the way we used to. Or so we could assume. And you can think of all the different ways that God, in a sense, gets pushed out. We don't need to say, we think we don't need. because a lot of that faith was based on that kind of a sense of that there was no other hope other than hope and faith in God. And not only did she do that, but she also told the story of doing that, and told it over and over and over again, actually, especially when I'd be misbehaving. For my prayers, you wouldn't even be here, But the point I want to make is that there was also a great catechetical story that we had in the family out of that. Now, that isn't to say that her grandchildren aren't people of faith and so on, but it's just a whole different reality. And so, in a sense, it becomes a huge challenge. So we'll have to find other ways and persuasive ways of sharing the faith. In the church, there's no need to belabor this. The scandals that betray the gospel, betray our Catholic faith, the divisions, revisions, the tensions around Vatican II, even around Pope Francis. Millennial people say that the rationale is not enough for belief. They don't really, the mind alone is not enough by way of commitment and by way of spiritual commitments for life. So that kind of having teachings and dogmas and doctrines are not persuasive, or young millennials don't find them as persuasive. A deep skepticism in postmodern era around institutional authorities of any kind, meta-narratives, that nobody has the whole story all the time, everywhere, for everybody, and that reason alone is not enough. It's not enough to convince people or to bring people. A lot of those people, at least in the States, who leave the Catholic faith, say that they're no longer convinced of the beliefs. And in a sense, you can understand why. There's a deep skepticism. I believe, though, we were talking a little about this over dinner with Gareth and friends, that there is a blessing in contemporary consciousness that in many ways has greatly enriched our Christian faith, has alerted us to deep biases and prejudices that we have as Catholic Christians, as Christians of any kind. I'm speaking out of my own backyard, as a Catholic Christian, that an awful lot of the sexism, the racism, the homophobia, the unregulated capitalism we've had, that in many ways our culture has taught us and has brought us back to realize, or to help us to reclaim what I would call recessive genes in the tradition, in our faith tradition, for human rights, for social justice, for care for the environment. That in a sense, contemporary culture has enriched our faith by confronting us. And it was modern movements that helped us to reclaim some of the richness, especially the social justice richness of our Catholic faith tradition, of our Christian faith tradition in general. As I speak pretty specifically of the Catholic Christian identity, but in Christian faith in general, it's contemporary consciousness that has brought us back to face the sexism, the misogyny, the racism that's there, the homophobia that we have, the dangers of unregulated capitalism. When you stop and think about it, you look at the great listing of human rights in Pacem in Terris, Pope St. John the 23rd's great encyclical, the human rights that he outlines. And you say to yourself, now where did we come by those? How do we come up with these human rights? Or even go back to 1891, the first great social encyclical, Rerum Novarum of Pope Leo XIII. Where did he get it? Well, in many ways, it was the threat of communism that sent it, because the communists were winning over the working class in France and Germany and Italy, and the Pope became alarmed and said, we've got to do something. These communists are promising them justice and are promising them a living wage. And then you say, but sure, maybe it's all back here. Maybe it's all in the gospel. Sure, Isaiah talked about that, and Jesus talked about that. So in many ways, it's modern consciousness that has sent us back, and cultural consciousness, to reread and to reclaim the values that we find there. You take the one of chauvinism. It's the feminist movement that is sending us back to reread our scriptures. And then you go back there and you see in John chapter 4, it says very explicitly that the disciples came back from the village and were amazed to find him talking to a woman. So they should have been in the world and context and culture of the time. But that's been there for 2,000 years, and we never noticed it. Or that the women at the foot of the cross, in all three synoptic gospels, the women at the foot of the cross says very clearly that they come up from Galilee. with him. Which, if he takes John's chronology, means that they were with him for the 3 years. They were with him throughout his public ministry. They were core members of his inner circle of disciples. And they've been there. That's been there all along. But it's only when we begin to bring a contemporary consciousness, or when women become scripture scholars, because the male scripture scholars never noticed that. And so much of what we can read of a contemporary society, contemporary consciousness, can bring us back to what I call a recessive genes that was there all along. And so you go back, and there's the first story that we find in our scriptures, chapter 1, Genesis chapter 1. They were all made in the image and likeness of God. So how to be discriminatory then toward people because of their sexual orientation is a heresy to our faith. Because it's very clear there from the very beginning, and it's repeated repeatedly throughout the scriptures, that everybody is made in the image and likeness of God, and nobody is any more in the image and likeness of God than anybody else. Nobody is any more baptized in the Christian faith than anybody else. But in a sense, there's a great gift in contemporary culture for our faith. Why weren't we talking about the environment? Why weren't we talking about the environmental protection and all the rest of it back in the 1500s? Because we didn't need to. We weren't able to destroy the world. Now we can, with the pollutants that we put in our soil and our air and our water, we can kill ourselves. We can leave a world that's uninhabitable. So it's about time that church started. So some of it, as I said, was kind of because of the issues that emerged, the consciousness that emerged. And so there's great potential to reclaim an extraordinarily life-giving version of this faith of ours. And some of it, now as I said, it's not as if it's not in the original. It's in the original, but we haven't seen it before until the society confronted us with some of our sins and our shortcomings and our biases and our prejudices. And so there's great potential there. And of course the disenchantment then is ever, I should bring you into the conversation. Let me leave this for now. Let me say very briefly, the disenchantment is always confronted by the thin moments, the thin places, that old tradition of Celtic spirituality. There are moments, there are places, there are people where the veil is lifted or becomes gossamer thin. And that God's presence continues. God's presence continues in our midst. And the subtraction theory, we're realizing what Taylor calls the subtraction theory. The subtraction theory was the idea that faith would generally recede before reason and science. And in other words, the more enlightened people would become, the less likely they would be to have faith. And in fact, that proved false. 85% of the world now claims some kind of religion. So an awful lot of the stuff that modernity said to us, in many ways, post-modernity, is saying, hold on now, wait a minute. It's not a question of becoming enlightened or not enlightened. That both belief and unbelief are what Taylor calls their takes, their perspectives. And any one of them is equally biased. The whole notion that reason and science is contrary to faith, whereas faith is basically, what your mother, your grandmother's fish roads or whatever. But in a sense, they're both trying to take on ultimate questions, and both are deeply challenged. There's a deep challenge to belief, and there's a deep challenge to unbelief. And I suppose my invitation to you is to accept the possibility that we can rise to the challenge. Faith is tremendously challenged at this point in time in Ireland. But why? Don't walk away from the challenge, because I think we can rise up and meet the challenge. And God's grace will always be at work in people's lives. I told a story this morning, I'll tell it again very briefly. A dear friend of mine, Joe, he's been an atheist for the past 40 years. And Joe and I drank a lot of beer together, deciding that Joe was an atheist and I was a theist. We were doctoral students together at Columbia University 40 years ago. And Joe has been a devout, pious atheist, a Catholic atheist, but a pious atheist ever since. And Joe invited me to meet him for lunch recently in New York. Joe has been, let's put it mildly, unlucky in love. He's had 2 or 3 marriages that I know of. He's had a lot of broken relationships, and Joe just gave up along with 10, 15 years ago on relationships, and especially heterosexual relationships. And he's about 65 or 6 now. And so I met him for lunch, and he tells me this great story. He said, "You'd be amazed." He says, "I've fallen madly in love." He said, "I can't believe it. I thought it was beyond all this kind of stuff." He said, "I'm madly in love." And he said, "The marvelous thing is, she's a wonderful woman, and she's madly in love with me." But he says, "I'm kind of terrified of the whole thing. I never intended to go down this road again. What do you think?" And I said, "Joe, I think it's a gift from God." And he said, oh no, Tom, now, this 40 years ago, we decided this, so I don't know why you would bring up God at a time like this. Now, you got to apologize. That absolutely, that was totally uncalled for, that remark. I said, Joe, sorry, you're absolutely right. You're right, I'm right, you're right, I'm sorry. No, I'm sure it's just chemistry. And I waited. And a minute or two later, I looked up at Joe and tears in his eyes. And I knew that Joe was having his doubts about his atheism. We all have our doubts. The believers. And of course, the great ultimate question, the thing the believers, that the atheists can never explain, is how much suffering and evil there is in the world. If God is a benevolent and a munificent God, how can there be so much suffering? We can never explain it. But on the other hand, atheists can never explain why is there so much love and goodness and graciousness and generosity in the world. So we're both confronted. This is a level playing field now, both for theists and atheists. And I think we have to rise to the occasion. Let me bring you into the conversation. I meant to be here about 10 minutes ago, but here we are now. All right, we'll take a little break at some point, I promise you. What do you see as the major challenges to educating for Christian faith in Ireland today? Take a note from yourself. I'm going to pause, and you take a little note. Stop and think. When you stop with that, it's an obvious old question, but what do you think are the greatest challenges to faith? Not just to religion or to church. What's the greatest challenge to faith? And let's say to Christian faith in Ireland today. Write it down. I'll give you another question then to follow up. Because it is a challenge. How would you name the challenges? And a second question, now think about this. What might be deep and particularly Irish sources of hope for faith? Because you see, every old culture has deep down layers and layers and layers, what Foucault calls archaeology. When you do an archaeology of Irish consciousness, of Irish culture, when you go deep down through the layers and layers of tradition, Foucault and other people think you can find hope. You can find sources there that you might have forgotten about, and yet could lend hope, and hope for faith. So as you would try to dig down deep into Irish consciousness and culture, and outlook on life and way of being in the world, what would you see as their source of hope for faith? Let me invite you, we just take about 2 or 3 minutes for this. Let me invite you to turn to a neighbor for a little bit of a chat. Now, if you've forgotten how to chat, then that's a part of the culture to reclaim. Because whatever else we were always able to do, we were always able to have a chat. They say now the conversation is disappearing with Snapchat and texting and Twixting and all the rest of it. Well, I think we can still do it. And if you don't feel like talking to your neighbor, don't bother, okay? But be willing to listen to the neighbor. The neighbor always has something to say. So just take 3 or 4 minutes and ask the neighbor what do they see as signs of hope or faith in the Irish context. We're going to go about another 20 minutes, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and kind of wind down. But I'd love to hear a couple of the comments. What occurred to you as challenges to educating for Christian faith in Ireland today? For any faith, indeed. But what are the challenges? And then maybe the second question might be more interesting. Are there particularly Irish sources of hope for faith? What did anybody think about that? And my friend Gareth my Professor Byrne, I should say, has a microphone. There's a hand there. Thank you. All right. If you, okay, we got it there.
Thanks, Good evening, Gareth. I'm a secondary school teacher. I've been teaching religion for 16 years now.
God.
Sorry to see you again, Gareth. You won't remember me, but I remember you. I'm just sitting here beside wonderful co-master's students. We're both doing student masters in Christian leadership and education. Until here tonight, right? Just to embarrass them. But for me, just in our conversation, if I focus in on educating for faith, not religion, for faith, that is an experience. And in how most of the students, and even the people in my life, not just the students I teach, people in my life, my family, my friends, my neighbours, how do I experience faith? What does it take? It's like, what do I have to peel back, let go of, turn off? You know, it's to get to that place where everything stops so that I have an experience. But most of the people in life that I encounter, it's loud, it's noisy, it's busy, it's action, it's one thing to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. There's no space, there's no quiet, there's no language, there's no practice. It's,
Sure.
yeah.
And you see, I love what you're saying. Rahner says that the Christians of the future will be mystics, or there'll be nothing at all. And by mystics he means there'll be people who experience God, who know the experience of God. And I'm going to say in a little while, that to me takes appealing to the hungers of the heart. Is there a way to dip into the hungers of the heart, of especially our young people? Because that was the church's mode of evangelization. In other words, of sowing seeds of faith. That was the evangelization, sowing seeds, catechesis and religious education, trying to grow the seeds. But you have to sow the seed. And if there's no seed there, then they can't grow. You can teach them about religion, they can get an A in their exams, they can get, or graduate with honors in their leaving cert or whatever. But the faith, that you have to sow the seed, and it is through experience. It's through the hungers of the heart. And for the first 1,000 years, there was the whole emphasis in the church's evangelizing was to appeal to the hungers. Like, what do you really want out of life? What would you love to be? What's your very best way to live? What would make you ultimately happy? How could you be the best person that you possibly could be? What would set you free? What would make you, they're great questions. But then we switched, in the last 1,000 years, the emphasis was not on the heart, but on the head. It's on reason. Faith, seeking, understanding. Now, there's a great richness to that. And of course, you can think, if you want to set up the two I don't mean to make them dichotomous, but Augustine was the great champion of desire and the hungers of the heart. Aquinas, of course, was the great champion of reason. Now, we need both. We need logos and eros. And I think you see both in the teaching practice of Jesus. I think he appealed to people's reason, but he appealed deeply to people's desires. And I think we've pulled back from appealing to their desires. I think there is a way to do it that can be powerfully engaging and make great sense to young people. But we're kind of scared of the desire to go there. But I think you're right, that the experience is imperative, and that arises out of the desire. I think Yeats' lovely, the last verse, I think it is a poem for old age. God save me from those thoughts men think, maybe a predominantly male enterprise. God save me from those thoughts men think in the mind alone. They that sing a lasting song think in the marrow bone. And I suppose the mind alone can never bring us to faith. Now, faith is not mindless, and faith is persuasive, and faith has to be reasonable. If you ever hear anybody tell me unreasonable, no, they're definitely misleading. And yet the mind alone won't bring us to faith. It's the marrow bone. It's the heart stop. It's the land of heart's desire that can bring us to faith. They can sow the seeds. Then those seeds will need to be nurtured and catechized and so on. It's a great comment. Give us another comment, somebody. Maybe somebody close there. There you go. Thank you very much.
Hello, Tom. Maura MacDonald. I'm a primary teacher for
Thank you, Maura.
30 years.
Oh, yeah.
So,
You wore well.
I've been Canadian, but I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you very much, Tom. Maybe I could answer your question by asking another question.
It was before porn. Go ahead.
When we're talking about faith, Christian faith, we're talking about Jesus Christ. So maybe the question that is in response to yours is, do we know Jesus Christ ourselves as teachers?
Yeah.
But if the teachers don't know Jesus Christ, how can we teach them about him and about our love for
I
him?
know. That hits the nail on the head, I think. We don't, there's a deep sense, I'm going to say this in a moment, there's a deep sense in which we don't know Jesus Christ. We know about him maybe, a little, especially about the Christ of faith. But the fellow, the carpenter that walked the roads of Galilee, as Catholics, especially as Catholics, we missed out on it. We didn't teach the historical Jesus. And there's a reason, and many of them went back to the old catechisms. The old Maynooth Catechism, the Baltimore Catechism, the Melbourne Catechism, all the national catechisms were based on the Apostles' Creed. And they took each article of the Creed and catechized it, question and answer. I believe in God, always God, God is our Father in heaven. But remember, the Creed goes from born of the Virgin Mary to suffered under Pontius Pilate. So we left out his life. There's not a word in any one of our old catechisms about the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. Even though it's reported, there's only 2 miracles reported 6 times in the Gospels. One is the resurrection, the other is the miracle of the loaves and fishes. 6 times, in all 4 Gospels, twice in Mark, twice in Matthew. It must have been a central aspect of his public ministry, feeding hungry people. We not a word about it in our catechisms. Or all the other great values that he practiced. Working miracles to drive out evil, to restore sick people, to console, having mercy on sinners. And not only the stories about him, but the stories that he told. The Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, Lazarus at the gate. We grew up without them. And of course, as Catholic Christians, we weren't reading our Bible the way our Protestant brothers and sisters were reading it. And so we have very little access to the historical Jesus. In many ways, this is what Pope Francis is trying to do for us, is to bring us back to that carpenter that walked the roads of Galilee. Now, he's also the Christ of faith, the Son of God, and the second person of the Blessed Trinity, the same person, God in 2 people. But that focus on the historical Jesus, and then you get into the compassion, and the justice, and the inclusivity, and the hospitality, and the respect for all people, and the inclusivity of women is central to his discipleship, and welcoming children in a world in which children weren't even considered property. They hadn't even the status of property. Wives were property of their fathers, the daughters, and then of their husbands. But children didn't even have the status of property. And here he said, no. The disciples were doing the right thing in many ways, so they were trying to push the children away. He said, no, let them come to me to belong to the reign. They own the reign of God. And if you people want to belong to the reign of God, you better become much more like those little children. Would have blown them away. Would have blown people away. But that radical praxis of the historical Jesus, I often think his praxis is clearer than his preaching. Because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John got a hold of his preaching and often twisted it or shunted it one way or the other, or edited it according to their own perspectives. I always loved the thing in Matthew and Mark, the story of the woman with the bleeding, with the hemorrhage for 18 years, or 12 years. And Matthew and Mark says that she'd spent all her money on doctors and felt no better. In fact, she felt worse. And then when you look at Luke's version of that, Luke leaves out that verse entirely. You wonder why. Luke was a doctor. And he didn't like the knock on doctors. So he left it out. So the whole thing, the 4 Gospels are very perspectival. And in what he said, don't mishear me, but in what he did, he was almost clearer. Feeding the hungry, driving out evil, restoring the health of people, forgiving sinners, going out of his way, in favoring the least, the lost, and the last. And then says we'll be judged. This is how we will be judged. Today's gospel reading, today's common lectionary, Matthew 25. And it'll be fascinating. He'd never say to us, there was a hungry person one time in the feather. He'd say to us, I was hungry, he gave me to eat. I was thirsty, he gave me to drink. This is the historical Jesus. Now I think our Catholic faith and our Irish version of it, I think has a shot at that in a way that not every other culture has. And that sense of compassion for the hungry and so on. but those who suffer. It can be very deep. Like we could find the
Yes.
historical Jesus. Yourself, please.
Just following on from your last comment, in fact, it echoes the sentiment that I feel. I think that being Irish, and I think faith is part of our DNA. It's ingrained into our psyche, and we may have maybe lost it somewhere along the way. It's not lost, it's just hidden temporarily, yes.
Yeah.
And I think life is about relationships, and I think at a real deep level that Ireland and Irish people have a relationship with Jesus, that goes deep. And like you mentioned, the picture of the Sacred Heart, and immediately it brings us back to something that we think we might have lost somewhere along the way, but we haven't.
Yeah.
And it is there, and it will come back again through relationship, community, through finding that personal relationship with Jesus again.
I think you're right. I would keep that hope alive. One of the questions I meant to point out here, are there embers? There was an old Shanachal that the quenched coal is easily lit. And I think there are embers in Irish consciousness and Irish culture that could be lit and could be fanned into flame again. So I love your comment. I think that's very possible. And I don't think that's just wishful thinking or naivete. Some of the things you might consider as embers, I just want to push on a little bit because we have a little ways to travel and we're going to take a break in a few minutes. The embers, I think some of the generosity to the poor is a deep aspect that you can't take for granted. You won't find this in every culture. And I don't want to disparage other cultures, but lots of cultures don't have anything comparable. And of course, I think we're third in the world by way of giving, and especially to people in hunger and in famine. And of course, there's no mystery to why. It's to remember the Gurj of Ura and the dreadful tragedy that it was, and to give to people who are hungry. Generosity to the poor of any kind, but I think with a certain favor for people in times of famine. Commitment to social justice, I find it very deep, very deep. And I think it's a powerful basis for coming to faith. The first reading in today's common lectionary is Leviticus 19, the holiness code. Be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Go home and read it, that text. Because as it goes on, it says, be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. But when it goes on, there's about 50, maybe 50, depending how you count it, there's about 55 principles to the holiness code. And at least 30 of them are demanding the works of compassion and justice. In other words, for us to be holy, it requires us to do the works of compassion and the works of justice. And I think young people who are so committed very often to the works of justice and compassion, they're not far from the reign of God. And that's what Jesus said about them. They're not far from the reign of God. Because the reign of God is about justice and peace and compassion and love and mercy and inclusion and hospitality and all the great land of the land of heart's desire, as Yeats would put it. And so that commitment to social justice is it's an ember that can be brought, I think, can be readily found to faith, especially when you explain why. And you tell them the story of Jesus and the Good Samaritan and Jesus and the prodigal son, and to give them the rationale for their commitment to justice. A deep sense of community, I know that can recede in an urban setting and maybe more pronounced in the rural areas. A love of nature. I think there's a deep, deep love of and respect for nature, but also a sense of the presence of God in nature that runs through old Celtic spirituality that I think has powerful potential, and of course will call us to all kinds of responsibility and so on for the safety of the environment. Generally, a positive outlook on life. That I always remember an old fella in my village, and no matter what you said to Joe, he'd say, "How you doing, Joe?" He'd say, "I'm not too bad." That was a great response. Now, Joe was as poor as a church mouse. My mother basically kept him alive by cooking extra dinner every day. And Joe would come walking by at noontime, just so happened to be walking by, and she'd go out, and I love how she used to say it. She'd say, "Excuse me, Joe." She'd say, "I cooked too much dinner today, and I hate to see it go to waste." And you do me a great favour now if you come in and finish it up for me. And he'd say, well, now, Mrs. Groome, I've had dinner already. I've had my dinner, but I hate to see food going to waste. So I will come in now and I'll eat it for you. But it was a lovely way she had of preserving his dignity. She'd never go out and say, oh, there you are, Joe, looking for your dinner again. Now I have it ready. But it was, oh, Joe, you do me a favour. But there was something, but Joe, you'd say to Joe, how are things, Joe? He'd always say, I never forgot it. He'd say, not too bad. Now that attitude, that's deep. And I think it has a faith basis to it. It has roots in the faith. And of course, the faith response to death, I still think we do this better than anybody. The faith response to death. You can say, oh, well, that's dying away, and sure, they're all going to funeral parlours now, and their wakes are nearly gone, and sure, it was just an excuse to have a few drinks. Yeah, but it was, the drunks all showed up, at least in my village, for the wakes and the funerals, and we're at one knee in the back of the church. I think the faith response to death is a deep structure, what Foucault would call a deep structure. And I think the poetry, the storytelling, the conversation, the ability to have a chat, I think it has great potential for faith. Because when people start telling their story, they'll very often recognize or begin to see the presence of God. Because Rahner's great line, that God's most intimate word to any one of us is our own story. Our own faith story is the most, and when you tell your story, when you share your story, it's a great way. It's a potential. I love, as you do, Calvinist poetry. This is one of my favorite quotes, probably yours too. Is in the garden of the golden apples, a long garden between a railway and a road, an ordinary place. In the sow's rooting where the hen scratches, we dipped our fingers into the pockets of God. So the poets know this, because of course faith is so closely allied with imagination, to be able to imagine. What faith to teach? What's at the heart of it all? Let's take a 5-minute break, and because the challenges are there, I want to do this fairly briefly. In fact, I've said a fair bit of it already. But I do think, be thinking about this. Maybe you can talk to your neighbour about it. You stretch your legs for 5 minutes. What's the faith we're supposed to teach? I think an awful lot depends. Can we teach for faith? An awful lot depends on what faith you're proposing. And what would you say is at the heart of it all? Because in a sense, you can say, oh, we teach the whole faith, we're going to teach the whole tradition of our faith, and we can't just pick and choose, we have to teach the whole story, the whole vision, and everything else, and that's all true. But then I say, but at the heart of it all, what's the faith we're to teach? The scholars often talk about this as kind of what's the canon within the canon? What's the kind of the nub, the heart and soul of it all, that could have powerful possibility of appealing, and especially to appealing to the deep heart's core. That's what we're after, the deep, what you hear, the lake water lapping in the deep heart's core. What would appeal to the deep heart's core of people in this faith of ours? Be thinking about that, maybe have a word with the neighbour, we come back, I'll make a few proposals, and then of course I'll teach you exactly how to do it. Let's take 5 minutes and we gather again. Thank you. Just have a stretch.
To the stories that he told, but the stories about him. And so we're doing better, and yet there is a way in which we've largely overlooked the historical Jesus. And I often thought the rosary was one of the operative Christologies of many of our people. But remember the old rosary? Now there's luminous mysteries, but the fifth joyful mystery was the finding in the temple, 12 years old. And then the next mystery is the agony in the garden. We skipped his life. And the same way with the creed, and we left out his life. And the catechism is marvelous on this, the catechism of the Catholic Church. It says the core of our faith is not the Bible. It's not the church, not the commandments, the sacraments, the dogmas, the doctrines. But I love how the catechism puts it. It says at the heart we find a person. The person of Jesus of Nazareth. In other words, the historical character, the carpenter from Nazareth, who indeed was the only son from the Father. So the presence of God in human history, as God among us, as one of ourselves, and so on. Indeed, the divine presence, and yet also the carpenter, the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith. And we need both. The fellow that wrote the roads, preaching the reign of God's love, mercy, compassion, peace, justice, to love God, to love our neighbor as ourselves, even to love enemies. worked miracles to heal the sick, feed the hungry, drive out evil, fulfilled Isaiah, this extraordinary story in Luke chapter 4 when he comes into the synagogue on a Sabbath day and is given the text of Isaiah to read. And the Greek verb there is heurisko. It's often translated as he found the text. Well, he found it because he looked for it. And then the most radical text he could find in the Hebrew Scriptures, Isaiah 61:1, and said, "The Spirit of God is upon me and has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, liberty to captives, sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim God's year of Jubilee." And then says, "Today this text is fulfilled in your hearing." And there's something about it that and then it says in Luke chapter 4 that all eyes in the synagogue were fixed on Jesus. And that line is taken up again in the epistle to the Hebrews, where the author of Hebrews, whoever it might have been, says, "Let us fix our eyes on Jesus." I think now it's not as if Jesus becomes the whole story. He's not. It's not as if we fall into a kind of solipsistic narcissism, myself and Jesus, me and Jesus, me and Jesus. No, Jesus becomes the interpretive lens through which we interpret every other aspect of our faith. So Jesus then shapes how we believe in God. Because he said himself, "Whoever sees me sees the Father." Well, but then you begin to realize that our God is a God of compassion and mercy and inclusion and hospitality, the same as Jesus was. And then the same way the Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit is carrying on the work of God's saving work and liberating work in Jesus. And then the church is supposed to be the community that continues God's saving work through Jesus as a sacrament of God's reign in the world. And then so it's not as if we limit ourselves just to Jesus, but it's that Jesus becomes the interpretive lens for everything else. And in many ways, I think this is what Pope Francis is trying to do for us and to remind us, and where we might find and encounter this Jesus, and bringing us back to find him where he's most likely to be found. Now, he's also the Christ of faith, God among us as one of ourselves, revealing who God is, how God is for us, and then believing that it's by his death and resurrection that life and history has been transformed, conquering sin, social, personal, even death, with us always, and that by God's abundant grace, yesterday's reading from Romans chapter 6, by God's abundant grace in Jesus Christ, that it is possible to live as disciples. And that's the core and heart of our faith, to try to live, to walk the way, to follow the way. And he said himself, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And as I said, he's the interpretive lens to every other aspect of our Christian faith. He can appeal, I think, he can appeal to the eros and the logos, the hungers of the heart, and to good reason. Our hungers for love, within the ambit of God's unconditional love. This whole extraordinary, made in the image and likeness of a God of triune love, made to love and be loved with our whole being. In some ways, he couldn't have cast the greatest commandment as anything else, other than love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, and strength, love your neighbor as yourself. Our quest for happiness, our hunger for happiness, I think he's a deep appeal. Aristotle said that the ultimate hope in life, the ultimate quest in life is for happiness. But he says, blessed. Now, makarios is the word there in the Beatitudes, but makarios can be translated as blessed, but also as happy. Happy are the peacemakers. It's a heck of a lot better way to live as a peacemaker rather than a hate purveyor or a conflict causer. It's to live with peace and to be a peacemaker. Happy are the poor in spirit. That we're better off without the hunger for things, and we need enough to live on, but after that, it's far better to live with the spirit of poverty. Happy are the peacemakers. Happy are those who hunger and thirst for justice, and so on. So that the clue to happiness could very well be this way that he modeled. The hunger for hope, this extraordinary sense in our faith that by God's grace, that God's will can be done on earth as in heaven, that it can deliver us from evil. The hope that we have that God's grace, which of course always works through our efforts and empowers our efforts, is not as if there's no cheap grace. And yet our whole theology of grace and what he preached can be a tremendous sense of hope for people. I often think that people who know this best, and especially the Catholic theology of nature and grace, are people in recovery. from addiction of one kind or another. I don't think it's a coincidence that the two founders of AA were Irish Catholics. I don't think it's a coincidence at all. But the whole notion that indeed the struggle for sobriety can be an extraordinary struggle, it's just, I'm so in awe of my alcoholic friends who are in recovery. I'm so inspired by them, and they'll all tell you the same thing. It's a heck of a struggle. But they do it with the help of higher power. And that's the Catholic theology, that's our Christian theology of nature and grace working together. And that no addiction can be unconquerable by the grace of God. It can deliver us from evil. It can be a tremendous sense of hope, for affirmation. So often he said to people, it's fascinating, almost invariably, when he cured somebody, he never said to them, I just cured you. He always says, your faith cured you. That woman with the hemorrhage, he says to her, your faith has cured you. The leper that came back to give thanks, he says, your faith cured you. Bartimaeus, the blind beggar, he says, your faith cured you. Tremendous affirmation of people's own agency and for purpose and meaning. Imagine him saying these are great hungers of the human heart. I mean, there's nothing worse than a life where you feel it's all eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, that has no purpose, no meaning. But he's tremendous. He says, imagine him saying to poor peasant people, you're the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world. Prepared a place for us. The hunger for life. He said he came that you may have life and have it to the full. The hunger for inclusion and community. You can go on and on. The hungers of the heart. Yourself, sir.
Well,
wait till we see.
Without question, I think we need it. I've been teaching for, not boasting or anything, but 33 years.
Wow. Isn't that started after
I'm very old school.
Yeah, started after your first communion. I know. Yeah, go ahead.
But I would. I loved your piece about experience, and I think you mentioned Lonergan.
Ranner.
Oh, sorry.
But Lonergan would agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Experience, understand, judge, decide.
Yes.
Do.
Yes.
Students today, they will champion anything. They will do anything. And to me, the challenge is trying to get back to the experience. And for the last 10 years, I've taken students to Africa. And one of the first things I asked them to do, will you come to Mass on Sunday? That's the very first thing we do. And Mass is not 20 minutes.
No, 2 or 3 hours, I know.
It's 2 to 3 hours.
I know, yeah.
They come away, some of them actually cry. And some they're moved. And the reason I think they're so moved is because the experience is real. And somehow we have to rediscover it. You know, within the institution, church, and in some way we have to get back to the experience of Jesus as a living person.
And I love your thing on Lonergan, because if I could follow back on that for a minute, you said it in passing, but you see, to get them to reflect on the experience, that's when Lonergan would say they can become to understand it. But then they'll have to move on and make judgments and decisions, and that's when they come to faith. That's when they come not to knowledge, but to wisdom, and to spiritual wisdom. So that cumulative, that kind of reflecting on it and understanding of it, then moving to judgments and decisions. And it's not rocket science. Just to say to somebody, what do you think? Does that make any sense to you? How would you feel about that? That's an invitation to judgment. And then, well, what would you do with it? Suppose we took it seriously. What difference would it make? What would you learn? That's judgment. And yet so seldom, so often in religious education, we try to get people to look at the data and understand it, and then give it back accurately to us, and then we think they passed it. But to push them on into judgments and decisions about it. And that's really, I think, the key to that is questions. The question you raise. Ask them, what did you learn in school today? That's an invitation to judgment. And what would you do with it? What difference would it make if you took it seriously? That judgment and decision is crucial if they're to come to a spiritual wisdom rather than just information and knowledge. Great point. Thank you. Somebody else was going to say a word.
Tom, I worked for myself in this institution for about 31 years. And I was teaching philosophy of education and in close liaison with the religious aid department. And over that time, I was trying to figure out how to engage people, particularly Irish people, and I have 4 sons myself. And I came to the conclusion that really to put the ball into their court, one had to begin with the questions.
Yes.
Rather than the answers. And I began with cosmology threw everything at them. How long have we been intelligent? What questions did we ask? What answers did we come up with?
Why is there anything other than nothing?
Yeah, exactly. And I used to get them to keep a journal, and someone that said, "This is wrecking my head." Others would say, and they were all very bright, "Why did nobody ever ask these questions? I've been 14 years in education already." So you got to mix and then took them from there into education and the different stories we told ourselves. But at the end of the day, the ball is in their court. Said, "I'm Christian, I'm Catholic, but some of my best friends were agnostics, atheists. The ball is in your court." You know?
Your choice.
And in that context, I think, what I came to the conclusion that in that context, Christianity might make sense to them. Or even agnosticism and atheism would make sense to them as people who are searching for answers. The one thing I said to them, you cannot live without meaning of some description. Even if you say the meaning of life is that there's no meaning, but that's the meaning for life.
Okay, marvelous. Thank you very much. Beautiful. Marvelous. Let me push on a little bit, because I could say all kinds of things in response to that, but the tempus always fuges, as they said in Bog Latin. And I want to say something about the approach. And there was a question, how to appeal to their hearts as well as their heads. But a lot of it is around their own experience, their quest for meaning, because you can't think dispassionately about the meaning of life. You're deeply involved. It has to involve you. And that's where you get the experience and the experiential, when you can get people personally involved. Now, I have been talking about this for about 45 years, and God knows some of you have taught it and taught it better than I teach it, and modeled it better than I model it, especially on occasions like this. But it's an amazingly simple idea. It's getting people to move from life to faith, and from faith to life. I've written about it as a shared Christian praxis approach, but it could be as simple as this. And I was lecturing one night in Lithuania and trying to explain with an interpreter what I meant by shared Christian praxis. And my interpreter was having a tough time, and she finally said to me, "Tom, what the hell do you mean by shared Christian praxis?" I said, "It's a very simple process. You just bring your life to the faith, and you try to bring the faith to your life." She said, "Great, but don't I tell them that?" And she told them that, and I've been calling it that myself ever since. So I owe the insight really to a dear friend who was trying to translate me into Lithuanian. I think in teach faith traditions so that people learn about it. Some of you are very familiar with that, so they learn from it, or that you become it. Now, that's Michael Grimmett's threefold categories. To learn about it is that objective study of religion, which I think is a large part of a waste of time. Or you can move on, if that's where you end, and help them to learn from it for their lives, regardless of what identity they may take on, or they may decide to become it and take it on as their identity. But I think we can at least teach it in a way that they learn from it. And then to religious education curriculum of a Catholic school is in a sense to persuasively give access to the truths and spiritual wisdom of Christian faith, at least in a way that people could learn from it, and maybe dispose of them if they so choose, and as appropriate, to embrace it as their identity. I think to do that requires a pedagogy that engages students' everyday lives, or as my friend back up here said earlier, their experience. Or what Freire would say, the generative themes, the stuff that matters, the heart's desires, that somehow connects with their lives. I think if we don't do that, then we won't bring them to faith. We may bring them to religion, we may bring them to theology, we may bring them to know about their faith, but if we're to influence and shape their lives, if to educate for faith, then we have to engage their lives. And what Freire would call the generative themes, what Julian of Norwich calls the heart's desires. And then in the midst of that, to give them access to the scriptures, the traditions of Christian faith, or whatever faith they may be teaching. I can imagine somebody teaching a course on world religions, teaching Islam, for example, but you give them that type of respectful, informed, persuasive access, so that it's not sounding silly, it's making sense. You can easily know why good and decent people have clung to this tradition for 1,500 years or whatever, or 2,500 years if your teaching is Buddhism or Hinduism and so on, and enable them to come to recognize the spiritual wisdom in its faith tradition. so that they might indeed embrace it, make it their own, and maybe enhance their own faith and their own identity in faith. When you think about him teaching, take a look. This is a picture of him teaching. Took it myself. What do you think was his style? What would you imagine? When you look at it there in the midst of the people teaching away, and the women and the children all included, and young and old, what do you think? What was his style? How would you describe it? Pardon? Casual, yeah, relaxed, inclusive, yes. Kind, yes, I would say. Pardon? Personal, things like that, contact. Respectful, yes. Informal, very often.
Easy to understand.
Pardon?
Easy to understand. Easy to understand.
Easy. Easy to understand, absolutely. Sorry, I just couldn't hear you. Easy to understand. Friendly, yeah, definitely. Challenging, yes. Oh my goodness, yeah. It could be very, very challenging. Love your enemies. Pardon? Provoking, yeah. Yeah, getting people to think. He asks questions. We always think about him talking, preaching. He asks questions 313 times. In the four Gospels, you'll find them asking 313 questions. Some of them are repeated in the Synoptics. But he was always asking questions. Who do you think I am? Who is my neighbor? Great questions. Another reflection on his style. Hands-on, yeah. Definitely deeply engaged. I'm going to propose, this is a bit biased, I'm going to propose that his style was that his pedagogy can inspire. He's described his teaching 150 times. In other words, his predominant public ministry was as an educator. And he appealed to both Logos and Eros, as I said already, reason and desire, the desires of people's hearts, the notion of God's reign, the hope that is there. And his constant intent, I think, was to get people to integrate life and faith into a living faith. And I think he typically did it by moving from life to faith to life. When you look at his pedagogy throughout the scriptures, he invariably begins with people's ordinary everyday lives, with their own interests, their own concerns, their own situation, their own praxis, prayer might say, their own experience, doing it so. But call it whatever you like. He began with the everyday. Fishing. The reign of God is like sorting fish. The reign of God is like a farmer going out to sow seed. The reign of God is like a woman baking bread. Look at the lilies of the field. Look at the birds of the air. Look at the ordinary, the everyday. The beggars at the gate. There was a family who had two sons. One of them says, "Give me half my property." There was a man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. The man went out to hire people for his vineyard. He was extraordinary. Typically, getting people to stop and look at their own lives, engaging their own, what Freire would call their own realidad, their own reality. Or whether you call it praxis, experience, whatever it is, it was the everyday of people's lives. But then he often got them to look at their life in a whole new way, turn their world upside down at times. So the Samaritan becomes the neighbor, the prodigal is welcomed home, Lazarus at the gate goes home to Abraham, and the rich man goes to hell. Would it turn more people's world upside down? The word of the time, wealth was seen as a blessing from God, poverty as a punishment from God. He was turning people's world upside down in this kind of stuff he was saying. And that this fishing, but there'll be a sorting in the midst of it all. So getting them to see and to look at life in a whole new way, with a whole new attitude. You have heard it said, but I said. And then he taught his gospel, and into the midst of their life he taught them with authority, persuading by reason and desire, constantly appealing to people's heads, but to people's hearts as well. And then encouraging them to see for themselves, to come to personal conviction. My friend's comment here about the freedom that you leave them to choose. That's classic. The rich young man, he says to him, come follow me, go sell what you have and give to the poor. And the rich young man walks away. And that Jesus is sad because he had many possessions, but he doesn't go running after him, saying, you have to get in behind me. Or when they come to him in John chapter 6 and say, many people are walking away and will no more walk in your company. Jesus turns to the disciples and says, would you also like to go away? Total freedom. And I often hear Peter saying, well, we've thought about it, but with the word of everlasting life. But it's extraordinary. But often getting them to see for themselves, and to get them to see in a new way. So those laborers in the vineyard, I mean, it bugs the heck out of you, doesn't you? Those of us who bore the heat of the day, thinking that the characters who come at the 11th hour are also going to get paid. And they're going to get paid not because they earned it, but because they needed it. The compassion. Because a day laborer depended on a day's wages to go home and feed their family. And if they went home without the coin, the family went hungry. So that the workers at the 11th hour get paid not because they deserve it, but because they need it. It was helping people to see for themselves in a whole new way, with personal conviction, and of course constantly inviting them to decisions for life, to follow the wisdom that he showed. You find it writ large throughout the scriptures, but as many of you have heard me say, and I've written about it as well, and there's videos and all kinds of things, I believe. I've never watched it on my YouTube, never. But it's extraordinary. It's writ large throughout his public ministry, but especially on the road to Emmaus. Now there's the risen Christ. But it's extraordinary how the text begins by saying, that same day, it was Easter Sunday, two of the disciples are making their way to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles distant from Jerusalem, so not too far, discussing as they went along all that had happened. And in the midst of their lively exchange, Jesus himself approaches and begins to walk along with them. Now that's to me the ultimate description of an educator in faith, to join their company and walk along with them. And for some reason they are prevented from recognizing him, so they don't recognize him. And the scripture scholars still buckets of things saying, why didn't they recognize him? My better question, pedagogical question, is why didn't he introduce himself? I mean, if I was the risen Christ, I would have jumped up and said, hey, it's me. But he never tells them what to see. He joins their company and walks along with them. And then he says to them, quite casually, what are you discussing as you go upon your way? In other words, tell me your story. What's going on? What happened? Tell me about it. And they look at him, and one of them in distress, Cleophas by name, turns to him and says, are you the only one in Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that went on there these past few days? I mean, where have you been? And then, now let's agree, nobody knew better than he what went on in Jerusalem these past few days. And yet he turns to them and he says, what things? Tell me about it. You see, that's the question. Tell me the story. What's going on in your life? What's happening? Tell me about it. Begin with their own reality, Dad. And they do. They begin and they tell them their story and their shattered vision. They said all the things to do with Jesus of Nazareth, prophet, powerful in all the light, the eyes of God and all the people, and how our chief priest took him and had him crucified. And now some women went to the tomb before dawn and came back saying that they've seen a vision of angels. And we've given up hope and we don't believe the women. And some men went to the tomb and saw nothing, and we're basically getting the heck out of there. And some of the scripture scholars say that Emmaus was a Roman garrison. And they may be going over to the enemy, afraid that they're going to get killed if they stayed in Jerusalem and were identified as disciples, that maybe they'd all be crucified. The Romans at one time crucified 10,000 people around Jerusalem in about the year 1213, the Christian era, to blot out a rebellion. 10,000 people got crucified. So the Romans were accustomed to mass crucifixions. So these people, maybe they were running away. And we were hoping he was the one. But only then does Jesus begin and tell them the great story, the great vision. Beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted every passage of Scripture that referred to himself. And the Messiah had to suffer so as to enter into his glory. So you can imagine him with persuasion, and yet he doesn't tell them what to see. He waits for them to come to see for themselves, which they do in the breaking of the bread. And it's the exact same 4 verbs as at the Last Supper. He took it, he blessed it, he broke it, he gave it. With that, their eyes were open and they recognized him. That's what you're looking for. That's what we're hoping for. That they'll come to see for themselves. Whereupon he vanished from their sight. And people often said to me, why did he vanish? I said, in some ways, pedagogically, his work was done. They'd come to see for themselves. And they couldn't just toddle on home. They'd have to turn around, in a sense, and go back into Jerusalem, which of course they do. But they wake up, they got up immediately and they said, weren't our hearts burning inside of us? As he explained the scriptures to us on the road. That's what we're after, to get the hearts burning. And I think we can get the hearts burning with this great story of Christian faith. And then they get up immediately and they return to Jerusalem. And I always love the Jerusalem Bible translation of this text. They go into the community back in Jerusalem. They're greeted with, "The Lord is being raised. It is true. He's appeared to Simon." So now it's official. Simon has seen him. Why didn't they believe the women? The women saw him. But there was no. There were no. Pope Peter had to see him first. Then they would all believe. And then I love this ending. He says, "But then they shared their story of what had happened on the road, and how they come to know him in the breaking of the bread." And it's the bread of Eucharist, but it's the bread of friendship, the bread of community, all the ways we break the bread. But the catechesis on the road is important, and yet they came to know him in the breaking of the bread. And so that goes back to the experience again. I think that's another picture of the three of them on the road to Emmaus. I think teaching any religion or any faith tradition, you have to somehow engage students' lives with the real themes, the real issues. I think if you give them access to the spiritual wisdom of Christian faith, or Muslim faith, or Jewish faith, or whatever story or vision that you're accessing for them, and make it sound as if, hey, good and decent and intelligent people, their lives have been greatly enriched by this wonderful tradition, whatever it might be, for hundreds and thousands of years. So this isn't just a stupid old story from long ago. This is an extraordinary way of making meaning out of life. And then encourage them to see for themselves, to embrace its wisdom for life. I've talked about it as the movements of a shared Christian praxis approach. You can imagine a life-to-faith, a life approach as engaging a focusing activity, and then 5 pedagogical movements. Some of you teach this, like Sandra and all kinds of people, and teach it better than I do at times, and practice it even better again. The focusing act is engage people with a real life theme, or it can be a life in faith theme. The God talk doesn't have to wait until midway through. You can begin the God talk at the beginning. Then a life to faith, a life approach, begin with people's lives, invite them to expression around their own experience, around their own praxis, around whatever the theme of faith might be, or the theme of the lesson. Encourage their own reflection, conversation, using their reason, memory, imagination. Bring them to the faith tradition with persuasive access, whatever tradition you're using, to the story and vision of the faith tradition that's appropriate to the theme, the group, the context, and then moving back to life again. This is the judgment and the decision that my friend here was talking about. Encourage people's appropriation, their integration, their seeing for themselves, and then invite them to decision. At least, and the decisions can be cognitive, affective, or behavioral, and at least to learn from this spiritual tradition, this great wisdom that's here, and perhaps to allow it to phase, to shape their identity. Let me invite you, we've got 15 minutes left, let me invite you, I'm just putting up the life to faith to life dynamic. Supposing you are teaching, imagine just for a minute now, supposing you're going to teach, let's take a tough topic. Supposing you're going to teach the Blessed Trinity to a group of, we'd say, third year, high school, the third year, second, okay, what's that? The group set. Supposing you're going to teach the Blessed Trinity. How would you begin? How would you engage? Now that's as tough a topic as you're going to have. You'd be better off to win a lecture about it. There's no doubt about it. A hell of a lot easier to go and explain and do it up well, perichoresis and circular session, and use all the technical theological language.
You get a shamrock.
Yeah, you get a shamrock. Oh, what the hell? You get a shamrock. How would you begin? How would you get them interested in this old dogma or doctrine of our faith? Pardon? Talk about relationships. Talk about relationships. Yeah, because you're going to be talking about a relation on your heart. That's a great start. Well, how would you begin? How might you focus it?
Start with the family.
Start with the family. Yeah, marvelous. Great way to begin. Other suggestions? I did this recently with a group, and I dated myself. I began by playing the Beatles song, "All the World Needs Now Is Love, Sweet Love." And I had to explain to them the Beatles came just after the dinosaurs. Just after the dinosaurs. But then we began to talk about relationships and what is love and what is true love and how do you know you're in love and what difference does it make and why do we love? Why do we need to be loved? What is true love? What is false love? What is a good love? What is a good relationship? You can do around relationships, what are good relationships, what are bad relationships? How do you know the difference between them? And you can spend a day on that. You can spend an hour, try 10 minutes on it. You can spread it over a week. You can do it in a single class. You can do it over a month. But getting them to name and to look at relationships, family, whatever it is in their own lives, and then to reflect on that and to question it and probe it and use their reason, their memory, their imagination. How do we know? Tell me a story about relationships that make a difference, or whatever else it is in your life. Getting them to seem to reflect upon their own relationality, their own practices of love, whatever it might be. And then this in the middle, the third movement. What would you do there? Anybody give it a go? We're going to talk explicitly now about the Blessed Trinity in the context of their own family relationships, loves, hates, whatever. How would you how would you get them interested now, continue to get them interested in this old dogma of the triune nature of our God? Pardon?
Baptism of Jesus. The baptism of Jesus.
The baptism of Jesus, yes, indeed, a great place to begin, where we first recognize the presence of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You can go to that text, very definitely, get them into it, look at that text, interpret that text. What was going on? Why did God look upon Jesus as a beloved child, as a beloved son? Does God look on all of us, the beloved sons and daughters? When God looks on you, what does God see? Does God see the face of God's own Son? Julian of Norwich's beautiful explanation of the incarnation. Why plur deus homo? Why did God become a person? And Julian says God became a person so that when God would look at humankind, God wouldn't see our sins at all. God would see the face of God's own Son looking back at God and would be sure to have mercy. It was a beautiful way she had of expressing our soteriology, what it meant. We could go deep into that with it. And of course, Julian is spectacular of the Trinity. And the way she names God as Mother, God as Father, Jesus the Christ as Mother and Father, suckling is of the breast, and that we live our lives in the womb of God. The hands of God is a rich metaphor, but Julian says that we live our lives in the womb of God. And this triune God is not just outside of us, but is inside of us. There's spectacular stuff to teach about the Trinity. That this God of ours, we used to say, when I was teaching the class, kind of a demonstration class, which is always terrifying, I said to them, we've always said of the Blessed Trinity that it's a mystery that we can't explain. In fact, it's the mystery that explains everything. Explains everything about who our God is, how we are, how we're to live as a people of God. And then you can get into this notion of God as a right and loving relationship and lay out in a thorough. This is not, you can be as academically rigorous and as well informed and as scholarly as you can mount. You can do this with academic and scholarly excellence to lay out this notion of the Trinity. But then, what about movement 4 and 5? When you start, but however long it takes you, you start giving it back into their own life again. How would you cast the movement 4? What question might you ask? Anybody?
You don't have to make it personal first so that people can engage.
Yes.
Talk about it.
Then talk about it.
If you just talk about it, it's only talking about it.
All right.
Whereas if you make it something personal in your own, personal in your life, or personal to them in their life, it interacts with it. It expands out with the whole story, the whole vision.
Great point. Great point. What would be a good question that was saying through what my friend here has just described? What question would you ask that might?
How do you like the Trinity?
How, yeah. So,
have you an experience in your life of a relationship that really brings you to life?
Yes. Lovely. Lovely. Yeah. Other suggestions?
Who in your life gave their lives for you?
Ah,
Gave something for you?
Thank you, Joe. Marvelous. Being a person for others. How do you? In other words, you basically say to them, you don't say to them, oh, what is the Blessed Trinity? Well, it's the notion of a tribe of 3 persons and 1 God. You get that. So you want them to know more than that. This is where you want to bring them to the judgment and the decision, where you say to them, this old dogma that we've had now for so long, does it make any sense to you at all? Does it have any insight? Is there a wisdom in this? Supposing you took it seriously, what difference if our God is a God of right and loving relationship? I mean, and if you were made in the image and likeness of God, what do you think is the best way to live your life? What's the best possible way to live? If you're made in the image and likeness of a God who's a triune God of love, a three-way God, a three-way life of love within God's self and always toward us, and that God would have to stop being God to stop loving you or to stop loving me. Now, what do you think that means? What does that say to your heart? What does that tell you about yourself? Suppose you believed it, what difference would it make? These are like movement 4 questions they're just, as long as they get them to begin to see for themselves. I'm going to ask you a movement 4 question about 2 minutes from now. And then the movement 5, what kind of decisions can you bring them to? Where would you invite them to come out? Anybody have a suggestion?
Have some project in which they do things.
Give credit a project in which they do things where they put it to work. It can be, Lonergan says the decisions can be cognitive, affective, or behavioral. So you can get them to a new knowing, a new understanding. You can get them to pray about it. You can get them to do something about it or to do something with it. And it depends on the context and the situation and in which you're teaching, of course. But you do invite them to take it and somehow put it to work in their lives, so they don't just store it as information. This is what I meant at the beginning by teaching for faith rather than simply for religion or for religious education, where you get them maybe to make it their own and to see for themselves. But you can do this with any theme. And again, I just summarized this next example. I did a demonstration lesson at an international conference of religious educators about a year and a half ago, and I took the great Islamic tradition and zakat of this extraordinary commitment that our Muslim brothers and sisters have. They're giving not 2.5% of their income, but 2.5% of their capital to give it to the poor each year. And but we began by, well, anyway, you can imagine, beginning by talking, I gave them examples of poverty. We talked about poverty, why is there poor, what kinds of poverty, and we talked about physical poverty, which is always the defining poverty, but also about spiritual poverty and relational poverty. All of us are poor and experience poverty in one way or another. And then why are we poor? Why are there poor people in our world? When we pray as Christians, that give us this day our daily bread. The old tradition was there is enough bread for everybody. All of us had just enough bread, then everybody would have enough bread. It's just when we hoard it or make it or keep it too much to ourselves, that's when we don't have bread. Why is there so much poverty in our world? We are capable of feeding the hungry. We can feed all the hungry people who are well capable of it, just don't have the will to. So you can do social analysis, you can do psychological analysis, you can draw on statistics, that movement 1 and 2, getting them to look at it, to reflect on it, to question it, to critically question it, to talk about it, their own poverties, the poverties of our world. And then I moved into the extraordinary Islamic tradition of zakat and trying to explain the spirituality of it, that the whole tradition is that all of our possessions are gifts from Allah, and that we're simply the stewards, and that our stewardship demands that we give back is 2.5%. So you can lay out the whole story and vision, the history of it, but then in movement 4, you're beginning to say, now what can we learn from that? No matter what your tradition is, are you confronted by that? Is that something that maybe we could inspire you, even if, because of course Christians can find their own echo, and you can point out the echoes in movement 3 that they'll find in Christian faith. I was hungry, you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me to drink, and all the rest of it. And how did this great value run through so many of our traditions, but you're teaching it out of an Islamic perspective. And then what are our responsibilities to the poor? And how do we respond to them? What do we do about it? Because apparently we're going to be judged on how we do or don't respond to them. And you can imagine examples. Let me wind down. We still have 5 minutes, but I want to bring you back to your neighbour. What did you learn in school today? Moving forward question could be as simple as that. But seriously, like when you go home now, somebody will say to you, your spouse, some member of your community or whatever will say to you, well, was it any good? And you say, a lot of the same old stuff, really, you know. And you say, yeah, but they say, did you bring home anything at all out of it? What would you be sure to say? Write it down. What's the best thing you're going away with? from my ramblings, your own reflecting from what your neighbour said. Let's just write it down for a minute, and then we take a couple of minutes to tell the neighbour, because you can give the neighbour a gift before they go. But what are the agreements, the disagreements? How would you take it? What did you learn in school today? But then how would you put it to work? In your own vocation as a religious educator, or however you fulfill that. What did you learn? What came? And as I said, you could have heard it all before and do it very well already, and yet we're all growing, and none of us got it perfect, God knows. So what would you like to take away out of this evening? And how would you put it to work? They're the most important notes you take by far. So write them down in case you forget. Let me invite you to have a little minute with the neighbour, 2 minutes, you have a minute each, and then we'll have 3 or 4 minutes to wind up. Tell the neighbour what you're thinking about taking away. And if you drew a blank, be sure to turn to the neighbour. The neighbour always comes up with something. So turn to the neighbour, whether you have anything to offer or not, the neighbour will something else. Well, we better come back together, or I won't get invited again. We promised we'd end by 9, maybe 3 minutes after 9. Give us a couple of examples, something you're taking away that maybe you could surprise yourself. Yourself back there. Thank you. Maybe give Gareth a moment to get there. We'll all be able to hear about it. Thank you.
Just one lovely thing that I'm taking away from tonight is bring your life to the faith and your faith to life.
Yeah. Lovely. Great. That's a goodie. Somebody else have one that they want to tell us? Yeah, putting Jesus at the center. The best thing we've got, Jesus. Yeah. Take time to reflect and get other people to reflect. Invite them to think for themselves. They can do that and come to faith. Don't tell them just what to think and how to think. We've done that long enough. But invite them to think for themselves. They can see the point. It can make sense to their lives. And that we're confident of that. That's why we can invite them to think. And then, of course, to listen to their heart's desire as well.
Engaging them with their life. What's going on in their life? What's important in their life?
Yes.
To be with them and walk with them.
And to walk with them and what's important to them and what they care about. Yeah. And if you get into that, then you can have great stories to tell. You can, when you get the sense of their story, you can know how to tell the great story in a way that's a little more likely to get heard. See, that's always our challenge. This old story we have, it's a fantastic story. It's an amazing story. It's an extraordinary story. But how do you put it in language? And Augustine said it, Aquinas said it, that's according to the mode of the receiver. Because it's easy enough to put it our favourite way, but how do you put it in a way that they might be more likely to hear? And then I think you have to talk about liberation and humanization and possibilities and freedom to be truly free. Because old language, the great language, it's an old, great old language, but if it doesn't talk to them, then we should find another way to talk. Yeah, as part of the great challenge. One more insight, yourself, I think. Good analogy if you could.
Personally, I feel inspired, energized, and looking forward to teaching tomorrow.
Great. He says he feels inspired. Wait, see. I'm going to take the microphone for this.
I feel energized, inspired. I'm looking forward to going teaching tomorrow.
Fantastic.
But there's one question I think we haven't answered, is how do we get a faith experience, a living faith experience, into the hearts and minds of young people today? Yeah. To me,
I honestly think there's a real disposition among young people today that wasn't among my generation for the works of justice, the works of compassion. And I think it is a privileged place for encountering the presence of God. So I think there's a great value in those social work services. Now we have to get them to reflect on it and know why we're doing it and give them the reasons for it and ground it in the story and vision of Christian faith and so on. It's not just philanthropy or being nice or something. And yet I think that there's a possibility there in acts of service and compassion and justice that could be a part of it. But it can happen in nature. But I've started doing it with my graduate courses at class at Boston College, where we pause for a moment and just say, let's pause and imagine God looking down upon us. And what does God see? When God looks, can you believe that God looks upon you with unconditional love? And if you ask them those type of questions, why not? You see, in some ways, what happened in the church for the first 1,000 years, the whole purpose for doing theology was to become holy. It was Lectio Divina. It was the monastery. It was a spirituality. And then we took it and we sent it off to university. You know what happened to people's faith when they go off to university. But then we thought it had to be reason and reason. Well, why not bring the spiritual into our discourse and into our conversation and into our invitation? I have a friend, a dear friend, she's my sister-in-law. She was a wonderful religion teacher at Longwood Technical School for many years. But she would do meditation with them regularly. She'd put them on the beach and she'd say, okay, you're on the beach and there's a stranger coming looking for you. And he's obviously looking for you. And the closer you get, you begin to realize it's Jesus. And he comes up to you and he takes a good look at you. What does he see? And then you take a good look at Jesus. What do you see? And then he turns, he gives you a wink, and he walks away. It's a 5-minute exercise. But it brought them into a sense of how does Jesus look at me? And how do I look at Jesus? And when he looks at you, what does he see? And can you believe that he looks upon you with extraordinary love and compassion for who you are, however you are? Well, why can't we do that kind of pedagogy? You see, as I said, we took that out of academia. We thought that belonged only to the monarch, but for the first 1,000 years it was how we taught. And I think we can reclaim at least a little of the spiritual. And our young people, at least in my country, in my country of adoption, will tell me readily that they're spiritual but not religious. And my response to that is that's a great start. To be spiritual. You know that you've got a soul, you have a hunger. And we can build on that, engage that, nurture that. Yeah. I suppose one more comment. There's another hand over there. Can you, if it's a good comment, it's very flattering.
You asked about what you're leading with. I think those embers, those particularly Irish embers that you highlighted, are something that I'm definitely taking with me, because sometimes we miss them in the ashes, but they're there and fan them and they'll grow. So thank you for that.
Fantastic. Yeah. No, they're here. They're definitely here. And Young says it takes 300 or 400 years to kill the archetypes in a tradition, in a culture. But they live on, they live on. Let me end with a thought. God only required that the Didache was probably the first catechetical document written in the history of the church, outside of the New Testament, was the Didache. And the Didache tells the teacher to do all these kind of things, and you can get depressed reading them. What you have to do, the way of life, the way of death. And then it says, but if you can't do all of that, then do the best you can. It's a lovely kind of humanizing sentiment. The other one is that God's grace is always at high tide. The old Gaelic tradition, that the old Celtic Shanachal, I forget the Gaelic, that there's an ebb to every tide. Every tide rises and falls. But the tide of God's grace is always at high tide. And we do the best we can. God gives the increase. The time for station identification. Take a look at the Grado High School curriculum. It's very much based on the whole approach we've been talking about all night. Also, my friend Justin would be offended if I didn't, because he has copies in his book at the back. Will There Be Faith? Justin today recommended chapter 5, and I definitely agree with that, and also chapter 8 and 9 is a good description of the whole process I was talking about. And I'm not doing this just because Teddy needs shoes for the winter. He always needs shoes. But really, if you want to do further reading, this Will There Be Faith is a good way to do it. And I leave you with the thought that God's grace is always at high tide.
Well, thank you, Tom, so much for your generosity this evening. And there's a sign of a great teacher. He's finished right on time. But when I saw the slides earlier this evening, I couldn't believe how much he was going to try and cover. I said, we certainly won't get that done in that amount of time. So, Tom, congratulations, first of all. But thank you. And one of the things that I'll take away from this evening is, we can read the book as one level of the work, certainly, and we try to learn from, people who are thinking deeply about these kind of things, about what religious education can be. But your own search for meaning, and your search for life, and your search for love comes out as Tom speaks, isn't that right? So he shows us actually what he means when he talks. And I think that's the one thing that's out. We're going to have a cup of tea in a moment now, which we'll have a chance to just meet Tom and delay from that. But just to say a quick word of thanks, as well as thanks to Tom, of course, but to all the people in the background who've made this evening work, and for Breen, for people just back from India, and for coming here to welcome you, and Bishop Brendan, Kate from the Catechetics Council. But Justin just got a mention there at the end, and Justin Hart at the back of the hall there. Justin is the person who organised Tom to come this week, and they'd send out the invitation. Would Tom be able to come and join us here? So Justin, thank you very much for all your organisation. I'd also like to give a special mention to Sue, the admin person in the Mater Dei Centre for Catholic Education. And Sue's only just joined us in the last month, and this was really her first project, really, and I would also like to thank yourselves for coming, and for coming in such large numbers, and for coming so enthusiastically. And I think that's a gift in itself to each other, that we see, oh look, there are all these people who are interested in this question, interested in Tom's work, interested in being religious educators or chaplains. I can see people in the room, undergraduate students, master's students, doctoral students. I can see candidate deacons. I can see lecturers from other colleges. I can see priests. I can see religious school principals, the head of the Catholic Schools Partnership, a variety of people who are here. So it's just wonderful, I think, for us all to have the sense, and people from Veritas, sense of being here together in what we do. So Tom, thank you again for providing us with this opportunity, which shows us, in fact, that maybe we are the experts, maybe something in each one of us that wants to be here, and that we can draw from an evening like this, draw from our meeting with Christ and his look of love upon us, draw from each other to go back out into the world. And somebody said it there, he's going to go back enthused to his teachings. So I hope that's the case for everybody. Tom, you mentioned about that we at the end there that we might, by saying something to each other there in the last few moments, give each other a gift to take home, which was a lovely idea, one of my favourite things of the evening. But Tom, we give you a gift to take home as well. mention is that we have a sheet that we gave out, and maybe you have it there, maybe you filled it in. And this is the first event, as Brian mentioned, for the Mater Dei Centre for Catholic Education, as we are reimagining how we can look at Catholic education in and through DCU. And so that sheet that you saw there gives you the opportunity to give us your address and your email and your telephone. We'd like to be connected with you, and by coming here this evening, perhaps you have indicated your interest in being in this conversation, and we can bring material back out to you at other times. But particularly, we do have Tom's slides, and if we have your email, we'll send you out the slides afterwards. Is that all right? So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll meet you outside for a cup of tea. Thank you very much.